Welcome everyone to the StabilityHub Stability Chambers webinar. It's the third in a series sponsored by Parameter Generation and Control. We'd ask that you turn your cameras on if possible, but stay muted unless you're asked to comment further on a question you might have. Please use the Zoom chat feature to submit your questions or comments. If desired, you can address your question to a specific panel member. In the absence of your questions, we've assembled an interesting array of frequently asked chamber questions. Today's topic addresses chamber validation, qualification, calibration, mapping, and requalification through the user perspective. Because we've all been there and we've all kind of suffered through a common challenge. So we wanted to make sure that this particular perspective was used today. However, our panel members include people with extensive experience in the professional realm of chamber engineering and validation services. So they'll come to our rescue whenever we have questions. The session is being recorded and will be available in the articles and videos section at StabilityHub.com. I'd like to introduce the members of today's panel. Jeff Carr is a pharmaceutical consultant, ex-Patheon stabilitarian and contributor to StabilityHub. Jeff Cook is Chief Operations Officer at Parameter Generation and Control, we're chamber manufacturers. Ken Edwards, consultant at Concentric Bioservices and our validation specialist for today's program. Yours truly, a PSDG facilitator and editor at StabilityHub.com and ex-Sanofi stabilitarian. Walter Routh, founder and CEO of Sagana Quality Consulting, is ex-AbbVie stabilitarian. So we'll get started with today's presentation. Questions are welcome via the chat feature throughout the session, but please match your questions to the appropriate segments of the slides. And I am in a display mode that I wasn't necessarily happy with before, but in order to make it work, we have to leave you seeing the slides up on the left. So as I mentioned, this is the third topic in the chamber series, and stability chambers are critical components in determining medical product shelf life, and therefore in the success of our organizations. And the Parameter Generation Control Chamber Stability Chamber series so far has included a close look at a stability chamber problem several months ago, user requirements and chamber selection, and today's the chamber validation, calibration, and requalification. And then in the future, there'll be one on chamber excursion recovery and evaluating impact. So we hope you enjoy today's presentation. You can go back and view any of the previous ones in the articles and video section at StabilityHub.com. I'd like to acknowledge that much of the information and the graphics that come into this presentation have originated from materials posted on the websites of Tenney Engineering, LLab, Vicela, and the International Society for Pharmaceutical Engineering, more commonly known as ISPE, and a group known as GMP Insiders. We ask that you please consult these organizations for further or more detailed information. Today's topics will include the subtopics of validation, qualification, calibration, requalification, mapping, and remapping. And if you look through the FDA observations and 483s, you'll often find that some companies have some problems in the advanced wave of these requirements, and other ones are totally unaware that they're even there. So it's interesting to see a copy of a 483 that'll show that the company had no idea that they had to validate their stability chambers. So today's range of discussion will cover the entire gamut of what we need to do, and then make available all of our experts to answer your questions. So what's the difference in the terms validation and qualification? They're often used interchangeably by us, but they have distinct meanings and serve different purposes. While qualification focuses on verifying the fitness of equipment and facilities, validation ensures that processes consistently deliver expected outcomes. If we go by the general saying, we qualify a system and/or equipment and we validate a process, we can remember which is which. A system and/or equipment must be qualified to operate in a validated process. And a quick chart here that I lifted from one of those websites that I mentioned that give us a way to quickly compare qualification and validation. I mentioned one's equipment, one's process. One verifies fitness of the intended purpose, and the other one ensures consistent and expected outcomes. And then on the qualification end, we see the familiar terms IQ, OQ, PQ. We're going to get into that in great detail just shortly. Why validation includes activities such as process design, verification, confirmation, and qualification. Qualification is directly linked to the equipment, instruments, and software, while validation is directly linked to the process. And then they both kind of come together in this last set of squares. They're ensuring compliance. And that's the key piece that we need. Validation ensures a consistent process, and it typically includes creation of a plan. And that plan will define objectives, methods, and anticipated barriers. Selection of measuring instruments, choosing the appropriate tools like thermocouples, RH sensors, and data loggers, and we'll discuss those a little bit later as well. Preparation and use of instruments, ensuring instruments are calibrated and placed according to the protocol. Data recording and storage, capturing and storing all that information that comes from the sensors. Data evaluation that would be analyzed to determine if the chamber actually meets the specifications. And then final documentation and released. All documentation, findings, and release for the chamber use are properly stored and retrievable. And I'm going to count on Walter to watch our chat room, our chat features, to see if people are asking questions. It's a little early in the game yet, but we'll keep an eye out for that. With regard to qualification, that verifies the fitness of equipment. Typically includes ensuring the correct functioning and performance of the manufacturing equipment. The ancillary systems that validates the reliability and support systems integral to the manufacturing process. That might include things like the monitoring system, the air handling system around, and several of those things. With regard to instruments, they verify the accuracy and precision of measurement used in production, or in this case, in validation. And the utilities, that they're all qualified systems such as water, air, and power to meet the specified requirements. Qualification steps for a chamber to receive certification to conduct stability tests must undergo a 3 to 4 part qualification process and include the calibration records of all the instruments used and evidence of their calibrated state. And together, the qualification requirements and successful test outcomes support and document the proper operation. I said 3 to 4, and that's because that first one there, design qualification, often gets left out in these kind of discussions. People talk about the IQ, OQ, and PQ, and we'll do that today, but I didn't want to skip over design qualification. And we'll take a look at that in detail here. With regard to that, the design qualification is the crucial first step in the validation process that verifies the design of the equipment, the facilities that they go into, and systems that are going to meet the user requirements and regulatory standards before installation and operational qualification. The DQ ensures the design is fit for purpose and complies with GMP, reduces risk associated with errors, failures, or defects. It involves the formal documentation and approval from the quality unit, demonstrating traceability of design to critical process parameters and critical quality attributes as laid out by the user. Now, we did a previous webinar and went heavily into user requirements, so we won't review those in detail again. But I think the design qualification often holds hands with the user requirements. The designer of the equipment can tell you all kinds of things about that equipment as it lies in your plant, but they also need to know what size doorways that equipment has to move through. Is it actually going to make it into the room? Is the proper electrical connections there with the right level of power? Is the water the proper purity that's going to go into it? So all these kind of things are listed in design qualification. And I wanted to see if we have Jeff Cook available to tell us whether or not design qualification enters in heavily in the chamber manufacturing area, and if it actually does interact well with the user requirements. So Jeff, are you in the room?
Yep. Thank you, John. Can you hear me?
I can.
All right, good deal. Yes. So the user requirement specification form, the URS, is something that we rely on heavily when designing our machines. We work very closely with all of our customers on the front end to very clearly align their URS with our design specifications. Um, I can't speak for what others do, but we very often have customers wonder why we need such extensive info. And a lot of it is specifically to support this documentation that's needed in regulated environments. We used to actually handle the qualification documents in-house here at Parameter with our own validation department. Um, we now work with other companies and even some of our customers to have that done themselves. But through that experience, we become very knowledgeable in how to translate the URS into the design specifications to support the design qualification. Beyond that, we've also formatted a lot of our internal documentation to be more easily translated into the compliance documentation needed in the regulatory environments. So
I
anyone,
guess.
sourcing equipment in the regulated environment should be pretty aware that the manufacturer needs to be fluent in a lot of these items to make it seamless.
Mhm. That gives us the state of the art status of design qualification going back in the decades that I've been in the industry and stuff. We didn't have it quite as developed that in our early days, and we hadn't probably even heard of design qualification. If we had user qualifications, we were fortunate. And I recall an experience not all that long ago where I joined an organization and they were about to get a new chamber. And I was expecting to see a process kind of like this, putting together some user requirements and then coming up and working with the manufacturer for the design qualification. And what I discovered was there was a junior staff member had been purchasing stability chambers for years and just went on their experience of what they had from before. There wasn't much of a list. They just made arrangements directly with the manufacturer. I was horrified to learn that. And we started changing things. But I was going to ask if others on the panel have experience, especially people like Walter. Did you used to have user requirements and design qualification going way back from the beginning, or when did you see it come into play? Give
Um,
you a
yes.
chance to unmute.
I mean, even if it wasn't a requirement, it was a financial need to make sure that we were buying what we needed and that the price was right for that the design met all of our needs. It also is a time for the company to really start dreaming. You can use the design qualifications to say, wow, wouldn't it be neat if we could do this? And then you start looking for vendors who can do what you really want. So there's a business driver behind it, more even well, just as much as a regulatory or compliance driver. Um,
And Ken Edwards, you've been around for a while doing validation. Did you experience a shift over to the use of the design qualification and user requirements? Has that been evolving?
I would say with the number of years that I've been in the industry, it's been pretty practical for user requirement and design specs up front in the project. It really depended on the complexity of the system, though. Like with most other manufacturing type equipment, if it was a simple system such as a reach-in, it may not be as extensive. But once you get into the larger walk-in rooms and the more complex systems, yes, design functional requirements and design specs were pretty commonplace.
Okay, thank you.
we actually have a question related to this. It says, in your experience, do you find most organizations performing formal DQ for standard off-the-shelf chambers? That'd be either for Jeff or Ken would be great.
A little bit. The key word I would say there would be the standard in the question. As as equipment gets more standard, the manufacturer can sort of lay out the design specifications in a standard manner. So it takes a little bit less, or maybe even quite a bit less interaction with the manufacturer to align the URS with the design specifications, because a standard product has those design specifications already nailed down to the point that they can be communicated through a sales brochure or something like that. So it's a little bit less hands-on for the manufacturer when it comes to standard equipment, because they already have all of those design specifications ironed out to be able to publish.
I think it represents a good instance of why a company might be tempted to skip over that, and they certainly could go lighter on it. But I think from a regulatory point of view, it'd be fantastic to have at least a fairly responsible effort exercise to do user requirements and have that on record to show somebody that they did at least a initial approach to a DQ versus user requirements to be part of their validation package. I think that would strengthen it by quite a bit during an inspection. Okay, let's move along to the IQ. Installation qualification verifies whether or not the stability chamber meets its design specs. All parts are accounted for and checked that they are correctly installed. Proper documentation must be present, including the user manual and certifications and standard operating procedures. So that's on the user there to have those SOPs in place. That's how that's going to get installed. You would be working with your stability stakeholders in your engineering department, maintenance, anybody else that's going to be required to be part of this operation to do that. The requirements are that all components must be properly installed and functional for a stability chamber to pass the installation qualification. If the chamber has a control panel with a human machine interface or other pilot devices such as push buttons or selective switches, they must work as designed. And all calibration and safety equipment also needs to pass inspection. So basically, the installation qualification is that when you put it in place, hooked up well with the proper water supply, the electrical works, the bells and whistles light up, and everything is functional. Doesn't go into the details of the actual operation of the chamber, but it just shows that everything that was in the design is there, installed, and worked as it was asked to do. The OQ takes it another step. Operation qualification tests the individual functions of the stability chamber and verifies that the systems and subsystems perform as intended under normal operating ranges, including testing all doors, switches, controls, and alarms. The OQ involves temperature and/or humidity mapping of the empty chamber to confirm it operates within specified limits throughout. And it's required that when temperatures and humidities have stabilized, tests run for a specified time prove the operation within specification limits. OQ includes calibration of measuring equipment and defining thermocouple or data logger locations within a chamber. Door opening study involving the opening of the door for a short period while recording temperature and humidity in short intervals is also performed for a minimum of 3 times to calculate the chamber's average recovery time. This was the information that I got from a particular website. Maybe other companies do maybe just one run, but I think the most common practice is that they do the 3 that's mentioned here. So OQ is basically that not only has everything come on from the IQ, it's starting to do what it said it would do with regard to reaching the temperatures and humidity, regulating everything over time. And then, as I mentioned, it's empty at this point. And then the next iteration, it's full. So I wanted to ask, probably at the end of the next slide would be more appropriate, about repeating the door opening and closing. So let's take a look at the next one. Performance qualification. The PQ verifies that the stability chamber meets performance specifications under a full load. Usually the test is performed at the chamber's operating set point with a simulated product load to replicate a typical environment. Temperature and relative humidity uniformities are measured using the thermocouples and relative humidity sensors. PQ involves monitoring for alarms and other indicators of malfunction. Chamber must perform under full load for at least 24 hours to pass performance qualification. And after the initial study is complete, the trial gets repeated with a door opening study to calculate its average recovery time under the test load. So in this case, the PQ uses a simulated load, and I think there's probably room for a variety of interpretations as to what a full load is and what should be composed of. I've seen it done lots of different ways. People have set empty bins in order to block airflow. Other people have put bottles of water into their bins to simulate a load that can become a heat sink. And other people use things like dunnage, maybe old cardboard boxes crumpled up and stuffed in there. And other people use expired products. So there's a whole range of things here that you can do for full load. You can also define your full load as what's typical for your chamber to start. It doesn't necessarily have to be every corner of it. This is a good place to ask Ken what his experience is for what people have done in PQs with regard to loads. And then we can ask the question as well about the door opening and closing studies.
Yeah, basically the same thing that you said is the same thing that I've seen in the industry. So nothing out of bounds there. So.
Okay. With regard to the door opening and closing, we mentioned that happens in the OQ and gets repeated in the PQ. And I think that's open to some interpretation as well. Maybe perhaps ISPE has done a better job recently in defining exactly how that gets done. But I know that some people will just simply turn their chamber off and watch it go till it goes out of specifications. Others are doing the door opening to see how long it goes out of specifications. There's a couple of different ways that you can do that. I find all that information and that kind of data to be of interest, especially if something happens in the middle of the night, your chamber power goes out, but the door's still closed. You want to know how much time you have to get in there and move chambers around or have a crew fix it. So it's nice to know how long it'll take before it actually drops out. And then it'd be nice to know exactly how long it takes to come back in. What have you run into, Ken, with regard to that?
So with the open door, I think it's pretty typical for a walk-in room. Most folks will do a 1 minute door opening. At the end of that 1 minute, obviously close the door and analyze the time that it actually takes to come back into spec. For reach-in, I think it's more commonplace to do like a 5 minute door open. I think the theory there is with a walk-in room, you open the door, walk in, pull the door to behind you, and find what you're looking to pull out of the chamber. For the reach-in, it's more commonplace. Once you open the door, you kind of have to look around and find where your sample's at actually in the chamber, and it does take a little longer. So I think that's what I'm accustomed to seeing.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to take a quick break here because I know we'll lose a lot of you very close to the end of it, and we seldom have an opportunity to talk to you about StabilityHub, so I'll just take a second out. We'd like to ask if you check out StabilityHub.com for our featured publications, regulations, events, suppliers, the interactive forum, job opportunities, and more. While you're there, to sign up for our monthly newsletter to see what's new. That's where we announce these webinars. And we also publish articles that are associated with it. Now, I know a lot of you already came through the StabilityHub portal, but a number might be coming through LinkedIn, have not heard of us before. So we'd ask that you just check that out. StabilityHub is planning to return to live pharmaceutical stability discussion group meetings, PSDG for short. We operated those for over 30 years and they were very popular. And then they kind of got halted when the pandemic came along. And we've been electronic ever since, but we'd like to definitely get back to do some in-person things. Meetings are where attenders can spend parts of 3 days asking questions, sharing information, touring facilities, meeting vendors and their services, and networking to gain lifelong professional contacts and friends. Current plans are to meet May 17th through 19th in 2026 in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. And from that point on, we're looking for companies in the US that would also consider hosting future meetings at their facilities. If you'd like to learn more about attending or hosting such a meeting, send an email to me at john@stabilityhub.com. We're also in the market for people who might want to be involved in Stability Hub in an administrative way, people that might help out with forming our archives or doing some searches for literature and then passing those on to us. It's not a very intensive process. It doesn't take a lot of time. You can do it with just a couple hours a week. If you were between jobs or you have a summer intern that needs to learn a little bit more about stability, we'd be glad to have their volunteer services for just a short period of time. So we would welcome that. Okay, let's move on to chamber mapping. Mapping verifies that chamber temperature and/or humidity distribution consistently remain within the specified tolerances by taking readings in a predetermined pattern throughout the chamber over a specified period of time. Persistent high or low readings at a particular location identify problem areas to be addressed. Mapping is a crucial part of qualification and typically occurs during any one of these: operational qualification with the empty chamber, PQ with the loaded chamber, and then requalifications. We'll get into those. That's another important step, or perhaps under chamber investigation conditions. So chamber mapping becomes a vital piece of the puzzle, and having a plan and a skill and a map where your probes are going to go is very important. Some best practices: it's important to calibrate all sensors before and after a mapping study. Number and location of sensor probes may vary by size of the chamber, and it's a good idea to check out the ISPE recommendations. The people who do this all the time have taken the time to develop a lot of information. The probe locations generally include all corners, geometric center, and center of each side with a distance of at least 10 centimeters from the surfaces. An additional probe should be placed at the control sensor location and in a high-risk area such as doors or HVAC vents. For photostability chambers, mapping should also include consideration of light distribution. For ICH Q1B option 1 chambers, that might just be a requirement for a single point determination of radiation intensities using a visible light meter and UV meter, and then verifying the uniformity throughout the horizontal surfaces. For Q1B option 2 chambers are likely to be more complicated because they typically contain multiple shelves, each of which is fitted with either visible or UV radiation sources. The irradiation areas are also quite large, so it is recommended to conduct mapping of each individual shelf over the areas available for placement of the samples using the appropriate light meters. So I'd have a lot of experience in being frustrated with my stability chambers for photostability because it does vary quite often across the surface. You can have some great high intensity in the middle, and then it falls away quickly to the sides. Some companies have taken to putting mirrors on the walls in order to try and boost the reflectivity on the edges. So when you take a map of the surface using for the light aspect of it, you'll find that you get a fair amount of variety. And also having your instruments calibrated, you can send them frequently back to the manufacturer for calibration. And it's been discovered that if you take the same instrument and send it to 2 calibration sources, they might come back quite different from each other. So it's a process in development in order to do that. But I think the longer we have photostability chambers, the better off the technology will become for that. 2 good qualification and mapping resources: the ISPE Good Practice Guide for controlled temperature chambers are in their 2nd edition. It's been revised to align with current industry practice, such as we're hearing now with the development of better DQ things going on, particularly with respect to the ISPE Baseline Guide, the Commissioning and Qualification 2nd edition. And a word of caution: you'll pay a lot of money to get that, but it's worth it, especially if your company is buying it and not you as an individual. So the link there is given if you need to use that later. VISOLA application note number 8, steps to validating and mapping a chamber, is also a good place to go look for information. And you can see some of the requirements or the link there.
So But before you move on to the calibration topic, there are two good related questions to PQ, OQ, PQs. The first is, if the PQ was done with a full load and the layout was set up, could the layout of the freezer be changed after the PQ? And if so, would a new PQ need to be performed?
I'll give the user aspect of that, and then we'll ask the rest of the panel. I would say it depends. Are you significantly altering the pattern that would change the airflow? Or would you be putting any kind of new samples into the corners that don't get cooled down nearly as quickly or heated up, depending on what the nature of your chamber is? So yes and no. If you can't convince an inspector that you didn't need to do it, then you probably should have done it. A lot has to do with the validation. Let me throw that open to other panel members if they want to comment.
Yeah, I can chime in on that one, John. I think it goes exactly to what you said about it depends on the extent of the change. If you feel confident that you can justify that the change was not significant enough to impact the mapping done during the initial validation, then it might be something that could be documented as a justification. If there's questions about whether the change is significant enough, hopefully you could call the manufacturer, you could call Parameter. We would say, here's the layout of the ductwork in regards to the airflow. Based on what you are wanting to do, we might be able to make a recommendation whether or not a validation would be advisable or not. A lot of it goes back to your ability to justify it in the event that an auditor is going to ask.
Okay. Any other comments?
The only thing I think I would add would definitely be if you were, when we're talking about ductwork, I would do a risk analysis on the change of the ductwork, because that is the most likely thing that would cause an issue with its validated state. One thing I will comment on as well is, and I've been questioned on this, when it comes to actual chamber shelving configuration, a lot of folks will add rolling carts in the chamber, and as they relocate those rolling carts within the chamber. I've actually been questioned by an inspector as can you prove that since that cart was not put back in its exact location that it was in, did that avoid the validation or cause issues that you would not expect? So that's all I would add to that.
Yeah, and I would say it's a great practice whenever you do make a change, if it's a significant one, maybe not to address something as every day as a change of a cart position, because they'll change all the time. But if you are making a change in load, to at least do a written evaluation and to show that it was considered that, yes, you're recognizing there was a change, it was or was not a significant one. And it's a good idea to put out your criteria for what is significant, whether it goes a long distance or a short distance or blocks air or that kind of thing. Or if you noticed a change in the monitoring right away coming out of there, that you could rely on the data that shows that you made the change and there was no significant difference in your monitoring devices. On the other hand, if you do see the change in monitoring output, that's a good sign that perhaps you need to do at least a remapping or a requalification.
Yep. So we have 3 more questions in the background here, and we're about 3 or 4 minutes ahead of schedule. Hopefully we can make it. I just wanted to say, making a mental determination of whether or not your change was going to affect anything would be very dangerous. I think, just to say, you need to document it somehow, your rationale. But the next question we have is there a requirement regarding the headspace in a chamber? I.e., how can we stack samples in a chamber, or how high can we stack samples in a chamber with respect to the chamber ceiling?
think that's probably left to the manufacturer. If he doesn't recommend it, you go too high. No, nobody wants their ceiling to be touched. But you're right, it could be up to the manufacturer. Does it supposed to be 6 inches? Are you in a state that requires sprinklers that you're going to need at least a certain amount for the sprinklers? You can't be blocking that. You have to go further distance down under that. So I think a lot depends, but Jeff, do you have anything to add about that from the manufacturer's point of view?
Yes, from my side, the headspace, it might be the type of equipment you have. If you have an evaporator internal to the room, it's going to occupy that amount of headspace, and you might want to look at, where the fan and the airflow is going. A lot of your headspace, like you said, John, you have to not only clear the sprinklers, but you have to have sufficient space for the water from the sprinklers to be extinguishing your product. Beyond that, it might go back to where your sensors were placed in the mapping, and relying on that mapping data to verify that you do have the uniformity in the headspace you're looking at using.
Yeah, I think that's well said. It's a lot has to do with that mapping and whether or not you changed anything. And again, it's a great idea if you're going to come up with your internal SOPs on how high you can stack things. Have it in writing, have the justification for that based on some sound judgment, like the manufacturer's recommendation, the safety recommendations, the amount of airflow you're going to have, and whether or not it impacts your output on your monitoring and your mapping. Walter, was there another one?
There is. It just disappeared though. It was like, but it was related to this. Is can you stack things above your highest mapping probe? And I would say probably not. You've documented where that probe was. It's probably close to the ceiling anyway, so I wouldn't expect you to be storing anything above the ceiling.
Yeah.
But the next question was related to light chambers, and it says, do you have a recommendation for a light meter for UV and Vis that is 21 CFR compliant?
Me personally, no. Let's see. How about Jeff Carr? Do you have anything on the light meters? I know both of us have done presentations, but it's been a while.
Hey, John, this is Jeff. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, that's fine. Unfortunately, I don't have a recommendation for these light meters and UV meters. They are available. I suggest that you Google it or something to find them. We certainly use them at Thermo Fisher Patheon, but it was it was a different department that was using them. And I don't really know where they got them from, but they certainly are available. But I would say that going back to a point that you made earlier, we did have some issues, particularly with the UV meters, that when we sent them out for calibration, the results that came back could be extremely variable depending on where you sent them to be recalibrated. And so they can be a little bit questionable with their reliability. The alternative to using a UV meter is to use quinine actinometers. And I would say they are a heck of a lot more unreliable than any UV meter is going to be. So we prefer to still use the UV meters.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, I would only add to that if you're about to purchase one, find out if they're in common use throughout the pharmaceutical industry for the same purpose that you have, because they can be sold to all industries. And if other people are buying them and have been happy with them, then it's probably the best one to get. Jeff, while we have you live. I know your camera's not working, but you had raised a question that it's probably for others, but what happens when we're in this qualification process and we have a failure? Are we just moving the probes? Are we asking the engineers to come in and realign stuff? I think Jeff Cook has prepared something along the lines of whether or not the manufacturers get involved after the fact when a chamber is no longer performing, does it fall back to the manufacturer, or does it go to the local people with their maintenance crews?
Oh, yes. From my side, John, during qualification, the manufacturer is close to the qualification process. We can a lot of times be in communication with the validation or qualification crew. If the validation tech notices something minor that can be quickly remedied, oftentimes we can get that done and keep things moving forward. If you have a manufacturer that may be a little bit more hands off, you might have a validation tech that notes the failure and sort of carries on with the rest of the qualification, and it just ends up in a failure. It'll have to be remedied one way or another, but while we often support the local crews in repairing or revising the function of the chamber to meet the changing customer needs, I've found that the documentation needed to justify those changes is generally hard to get out of a maintenance technician. You're generally going to need those reports to be translated into something that can be used for justification in an audit and regulatory compliance. So a little bit of both, a bit from the maintenance crew, but it's always nice to have the manufacturer's support in making those justifications a little more robust if and when needed.
Okay, thank you. All right, if we cleared all our questions for the moment, we'll move on to calibration. And this is a useful tool. Well, it's actually a crucial tool to make sure that we've done everything we can with regard to calibration as we're going through not only the chambers themselves, but also the instruments we're using to measure the various aspects. Crucial for accurate and reliable stability testing results, ensuring the validity of shelf life determinations and other studies. Involves verifying the performance against a set of standards and making adjustments as necessary to ensure that the chamber meets the desired specs. And the intervals can vary according to need and justification, but should never be longer than annually, and are much more typically performed at 6 months with fallbacks to 1 and 3, depending on changes to chamber parts, settings, load patterns, and any other disrupting influences, including failure to meet a current calibration. So a lot of companies will rely on the longer range things, and if they're lucky, then not much changes. But if you experience a failure in calibration at a shorter interval, you're kind of out there in the wind, trying to prove that your product is still good. It was exposed to the things it was supposed to be exposed to in temperature and humidity. But if you didn't calibrate properly, then you start to raise all kinds of red flags with the inspectors. So if it goes well, you can extend the period. I like to see it every 3 months when I was looking at chambers. And if we had 3 consistent periods with passing calibrations, we'd fall it back to 6. And as soon as we had a failure or made a change, we would bump it back to 3 months or even 1 if necessary to show that was going on. We have to have a bunch of material here on calibration. For temperature and humidity, calibrate each chamber to the National Institute of Standards and Technology specifications in order to meet their manufacturer specs as well. And a reference thermometer or hygrometer, depending on what you're measuring, is placed inside the chamber and compared to the chamber's temperature and humidity readings. Adjustments are then made to control systems until the readings match, ensure accurate and temperature, humidity, and control. The idea here is that you're following procedures. I'll mention that in my early days, we had chambers that got older and older, were harder and harder to requalify and have come in. And we did have some times that had calibration challenges. So you need to trend those and be ready to make some changes, whether that's new equipment or just adjustments to your calibration equipment. There's some elements of calibration, comparing the temperature reading. This is set along the lines of a temperature one rather than humidity. Temperature reading of the calibration probe in the representative center of the chamber to get that chamber's display, adjusting the display to calibrate the chamber to get as close as the stated tolerance as possible. Then it gets a little bit more technical, provide a 3-point as found calibration verification. So the key there is 3 different points. If the as found readings are documented and verified to be within the manufacturer's tolerances, the device is then returned. But the instrument's as found readings are outside the recommended tolerances. The instrument can be calibrated using the manufacturer's procedures. And the instrument's as left readings, when they're all done, are documented using the same 3 points from the calibration verification to show that there was equality in the measurements. And then final documentation includes the chamber's performance within the tolerance, including the readings of the unit and its operation. And the big thing here, any instrument remaining outside of tolerance should be documented, tagged, and removed from service until restored to tolerances. In the good old days, we just simply had a few tags that were on there. If you walked around and inspected the tags, you could make sure that you were always within the time period. These days, there's calendars, bells, whistles, warnings. Nobody should actually miss a calibration interval because of all the great reminders that there are that can be with the maintenance people, with the stability people. All over the place, there should be bells and whistles saying you got so many days left. And then the whistles get a little louder the closer you get to your deadline without recalibrating. Anything on calibrations before we move into requal? Ken, that would be your bailiwick. Anything special there, or do we typically fall down in the calibrations? Oh, we momentarily lost Ken, but let's go to requalification. Throughout operation, stability chambers can experience drift or changes in performance. Requalification is the periodic assessment of a stability chamber to ensure it continues to operate within the specs and all the required accuracy, uniformity, reliability over time. So whenever there's a significant change in there, it could be non-like for like parts, component wear, repairs, modifications, or replacements. And as we mentioned before, load distribution. You need to define when you're going to requalify. What do these things trigger? And some people just simply set it up on time intervals if nothing happens. We'll show you why in just a moment on the next slide. Many regulatory agencies require periodic revalidation or requalification of equipment used in the pharmaceutical stability testing. Requal should be performed on a regular basis and or after any significant changes to the chamber, like we mentioned above. And then periodic remapping ensures temperature and humidity uniformity and identifies any emerging hot, cold, wet, dry spots, depending on whether or not you have humidity. After each requalification, the results should be compared with the previous years to track the chamber's overall performance. So trending becomes very important there. Let's see, when should it be performed? And it depends, of course. Some follow various recommendations to requalify or remap annually. The WHO Supplement 8 temperature mapping of storage areas and the technical supplement to the WHO technical series listed there say the model guidance for the storage and transport of time and temperature sensitive pharmaceutical products is the title issued in May 2015. It recommends requalifying every 2 to 3 years if no other change factors intervene. The discussion group has taken some polls on this because we're all over the lot on it, but they show that the best industry requalification practices typically reflect the range of 1, 2, or 3 years when the significant change aspect doesn't kick in. So it's been all over the lot. You saw the regulatory part of 2 to 3 years. Other people like to be more conservative, do it every year. Others, less conservative, report as needed, or is, in other words, only when a change occurs. To our knowledge, there has been no regulatory repercussions to any of these choices unless the neglect of any of the noted chamber change factors has been evidenced. So if you can justify it, you put it in writing, it's in your procedures. The inspector comes around and says, how often you do this? We do it every X number of years based on these reasons. And of course, we do it whenever we have a major change. So along those lines is when you should hit requalification. It's also recommended to conduct preventative maintenance operations at the same time as requalification. PMs are required as a measure to reduce the likelihood of chamber breakdowns and include such items as replacement of parts, inspection and cleaning, the drainage systems and anything else, the air systems as well. Replacement of light sources in photostability chambers. A best practice model to follow might be conduct an as-found qualification, carry out the required PMs, and then repeat the qualification operations. And then people want to know, should we just remap? Do we have to do an entire requalification? Is requalification a repeat of full qualification protocols or something less? Do we requalify with an empty chamber? I would say no, unless you had major problems, because it's not required to do that. But some folks do. I'm researching this particular presentation. I found a couple people that actually did that. Full or representative load, yes, you would want to do it with that to do that. And just a remapping of component, the remapping component itself. You could do that too, depending on what the nature of the problems might be in the chamber. So if it's just simply a little disturbance in the air, that's one thing. If it's a major change in the mechanics or performance, then you would want to go further. Opinions vary. What is it that you're trying to prove? You may wish to do remapping in certain situations or a full load in other circumstances. Work with your validation, engineering, and quality assurance colleagues to determine and justify a plan of action that's associated with your procedures, and then document your plan. So, any comments on that from our panel or questions from the audience?
We do have a question of quick and simple. Should we perform loaded mapping for requalification?
As a user, I would say yes. Ken, what would you say?
My experience has been it's typically performed in an as found capacity, which is already loaded, and it's, if you're half full at that time, you don't need to load 30% more to get to 80% or something. We just define our requalification as as found.
That is also what I see, Walter, as well.
Yeah, and something that I see often that may be a little counterintuitive is typically a loading mapping is an easier mapping than an empty mapping.
Yeah, I would agree. And Jeff Carr, you represent the contract world. And I've always wondered, because you do that and you get inspected on a regular basis by clients, do they at places like Patheon, Thermo Fisher, spend more time on requalification and checking these out and remapping, or is it pretty much typical of the rest of the industry?
Yeah, we certainly do get audited by a number of different people, including the agencies and the clients. And our remapping, we're doing annual remapping. So all chambers every 12 months was remapped in the same way as was done for the PQ qualification. This seems to get by very easily with the agencies, and all clients seem to be quite happy with it. And so that's the way we do it. I did see a question in here where somebody has asked whether they have multiple probes in the chamber, whether it's still necessary to do remapping. I would say it's pretty unusual to have multiple probes in a chamber. The chambers I'm familiar with only have one continuous recording probe in it, which is why we do remap it annually. If, on the other hand, you do have multiple probes in the chamber and are in the same locations as they were done were used for the qualification, I would say that you don't have to remap because you're continuously remapping all the time anyway. But I think it would be an unusual situation to have that sort of configuration.
I've heard that proposed that you could avoid remapping by continually mapping. Ken, do you have any pros and cons on that practice?
For the number of sensors, or for just the overall?
Well, let's say they had a number of sensors in order to have continuous mapping. Let's put it that way for the start?
Yeah, I would say if you had multiple sensors throughout the location within the chamber that the chamber was initially validated at, if you had sensors representative of those, I guess you consider that your ongoing valid. You have a continuous ongoing validation, so the chamber would technically always remain in the validated state. I know in the past I have worked with a client that was their that was their methodology. However, with the number of chambers they had in place, they shortly canceled that idea because of the tremendous cost in keeping the sensors themselves in calibration. So let's see here. So yeah, that would be my thought on it.
And then on the subject that Jeff Carr raised about, well, through the question, just having more probes than one in the center. In the past, I think I've heard people express that just to get more measurements, not necessarily to do the continual mapping. But it always raised the question, which is the probe that's really representative of what's in there. It's generally went better with inspectors if you had a single probe that you were counting on in a proven location to represent the rest of the chamber.
Well, technically, I guess in most cases, you would have two sensors at minimum in there. If you are, you have your control sensor, and then you have a validated monitoring system that you're considering as your GMP data. So there's, what are your thoughts on that? So technically, you've got two sensors there, anyways.
Yeah, one for control, one for monitoring, and how close you come. Okay, we are reaching the last few minutes of our program time here. Let's sum up a bit and say once stability chambers are purchased and arrive on a site, a detailed validation plan is required to achieve the GMP compliance, as well as successful operation. And validation includes a multi-stage qualification program, calibrations, and over time requalification. A group including the user, HVACs, maintenance, validation team, metricians, QA, information technology, training, security, and others should draft an acceptable, comprehensive plan and execute it according to published standards. And that's really good coverage in order to give yourself the best outcome possible when inspectors come into the room. Let me ask, is there any final question here before we wrap up?
Well, we actually have several questions. I don't think we have enough time to get into to many of them. So I'm just going to say you guys were really grateful for the questions. The size of the group was enough that we couldn't get to you all, but we will respond to each of you individually, and we'll see about a potential group email if possible so that everyone can benefit from the responses.
Sure. And in worst case, we can post it online in the discussion segment on our website. And then we can answer the questions there along with our panel members and anybody else in the industry who would like to weigh in. I know we have a lot of professionals in the audience that might be interested in giving us some responses in that too. So we appreciate that there are questions, and we'll do our best to get those to everybody to do that. Let me say a word of thanks to those who came and attended. We hope you'll come back soon. And we'd like to especially thank our sponsor, Parameter Generation Control, and our subject matter experts, Walter Routh, Jeff Carr, Jeff Cook, and Ken Edwards. There's a few things on upcoming programs that we can bring out to you. Join us again on July 24th for a webinar on stability program disaster planning and recovery. On August 20th, we'll be examining the origin and impact of those pesky nitrosamines that threaten our stability study outcomes. And then there'll be additional webinars on the new ICH guidance and final chamber topic in our fall schedule. And then the next Stability Hub office hours, which is a free-for-all question and answer event that will occur in October. Watch for announcements and sign-up links in the Stability Hub newsletter and in the events section of the StabilityHub.com website. We thank our panelists again and thank you all for joining us.
And the recording, by the way, will be posted on YouTube. You can search for Stability Hub, and I believe it'll come up in some way there.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.